Painting a sea turtle is easier than you think, and I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it, no matter your skill level. Hey, hello wonderful people! It's Genevieve, and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. So if you're new, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekly videos, and so that you can join our wonderful creative community. And with that said, grab your drawing tools, and let's get started. So here we're going to start with a super rough sketch just to break down the turtle and map out the basic shapes. But before that, if you do want to have a watercolor effect, you're going to need to have some sort of a watercolor paper texture within your file. Now to do that, you have a few different options. I know a lot of brush creators, including me, do have pre-textured files, so you could totally use those whether it is mine or someone else's. Or if you don't have any pre-textured file, I included a paper texture sample that you can download for free in the description below. And with the download, there's also a link where you can watch a super short video explaining to you how to import the texture within your file. Now, if you want to have my illustration as a reference here, the way to do that is just going in the wrench icon menu here at the top, selecting the canvas submenu and activating the reference toggle, which is going to let you import a picture. Now you can download my illustration as well as the color palette that we're going to use in this video for free. They will both be linked in the description below. That being said, we are going to start with a sketch, and we're not really going to see the sketch in the final result, so the color you use for that doesn't really matter. I personally like to sketch with a neutral gray, but you could pick whatever else you know you like. And same thing with the brushes. For the sketch, the brushes really don't matter much, so you could pick whatever you know you're comfortable with. Otherwise, in this video, I'm always going to suggest a few different options. I'm going to suggest free Procreate brushes that you can use, and totally you're going to be fine to follow along with those. And I'm also going to suggest brushes from my big brush bundle. Now I have a pack specific for watercolor in that bundle. And these brushes, they're definitely not essential, but they have a lot of color variation and textures within the brushes, which means you're going to be able to get more professional results as well as saving time in the end. But again, they're not essential. I'm going to give you tips on creating textures with just free brushes as well. So it's totally up to how much time you want to spend and how professional you want the end result to be. So if you do want to check out my brushes, they will be linked in the description below as well. And there's always a special promo code for the YouTube people. That being said, once more, just like for the color, since we're not going to see the sketch in the final result, the brush you use obviously doesn't matter much. So you could use, for example, in the sketching pack, so the brushes that come with Procreate, the HB pencil. Or if you do have my big brush bundle in the watercolor pack, so Ultimate Watercolor, you could pick the coloring pencil. So we're just going to create a new layer. I'm going to hide my example here, and we're going to rename this layer to Sketch. We essentially just want to create a super rough skeleton that we can build upon. So for that, we're going to start with the body, which is just going to be a pretty thin, fairly long oval. Now, having the body, we're going to add two circles, one for the neck and one for the head. Now, the flippers or feet, however you call them, you can really position them however you want, but you do want to make sure that they are aligned well kind of between themselves. So a good tip for that is just creating a slightly curved horizontal line to divide the top part of the shell as well as the bottom part. And along that line, you can just mark little ovals that are going to be, I guess, kind of the shoulders and the hips. I know that's definitely not anatomically correct, but for this purpose, let's just call them shoulders and hips. You see what I mean. But as long as you have those along one line on your shell, you can pretty much draw whatever shape for your flippers and it should work. Now the front ones tend to have a half moon shape, and the bottom one tends to be a little bit more like a rectangle with a thicker part at the bottom. And obviously you would have two in the front and two in the back, so you can just sketch those really quickly. Now the reason we're just breaking down the turtle in super basic shapes first and doing this crazy looking sketch is so that we can really early on in the process start playing with the proportions and the angle of the different body parts. So knowing that we have super basic shapes, then it's really easy to use a tool like the selection tool here, and then drawing a selection around a body part that you would like to modify. So let's say, for example, this back leg here, or back flip, or whatever it is, I think it's a little bit too, I don't like the angle of it. I could just draw a selection around that basic shape because it's just pretty simple for now. And then with the air tool, I could rotate it and reposition it. Same thing if I decide the head is a little bit too small, for example, I could use my selection tool, draw around the circle for the head, using the arrow tool, and resize it. So take all the time you need to move your pieces around. You can also use the arrow tool to just resize your turtle in general. Now, if you want to do that, make sure that your arrow tool is set to uniform, otherwise you're going to change the proportions of your turtle. And then we're going to move on to cleaning up this sketch. Now, you could clean up the sketch on the same layer that you've been working on. I personally like to just create a new one right above everything, rename it to Clean Sketch, and then just lower the opacity of the rough sketch so we can just barely see it. So this rough sketch is going to inform us again on the proportions and the position of everything, but then with the same brush, same color on a new layer, we're going to just go over and trace the lines that we actually want to use. For example, the neck here, we know it's not going to be a circle, but we can use it along with the head and the back to create a better shape. So for example, I would just trace over the front of the head like this. And then same thing with the bottom of the head and the bottom of the neck. So here, take as much or as little time as you need to just go over all the crazy shapes that you have and actually draw the outlines of your turtle. Now this clean sketch, we're not going to have it in the final result anyway, so it doesn't need to be perfectly clean, but it definitely needs to look a little bit more like a turtle than what we had before. Now I'm going to stop talking to let you focus, but I'm going to keep my video going in the background so you can use it as a reference. And we're going to meet up when you have all the outlines done. We're going to just add a few details on the face before moving on to the color. So once you have all your outlines done, we're just going to zoom in onto the face a little bit, and we're going to draw a little bit of a mouth, so just a nice little curved line. And you can also refine the bottom of the head so that it's a little bit shorter than the top, if that makes sense at all. So essentially it would look a little bit like this. And then you can add a nice big eye. So once you have your clean sketch, go ahead and delete your rough sketch. We won't need it anymore. And we're going to change the blending mode of the clean sketch to multiply. So you can just tap on the little N next to the check mark and then go select multiply. It should be at the top of the list. Now, without getting into all the details about blending modes, just keep in mind that using multiply is going to mean that our clean sketch, the colors of it, are going to blend with the colors that we are going to paint under, which means we're going to be able to see the sketch really, really well, even if it's on top of a darker color underneath. So speaking of which, for the colors, we're going to create a new layer. We're going to put it below the clean sketch and below the texture. So we want to make sure the textures are above any color that we're going to paint. And we're going to rename this layer to colors. I'm personally going to go with a more realistic turtle, but you could totally go with crazy colors. It's totally up to you. If you want to do like me and use realistic colors, we're going to start with the shell, which is going to be this brown right here if you're using the color palette. As you can see, it's really quite saturated and pretty much halfway in terms of the brightness, so not too bright, not too dark, pretty much in the middle. Now for the brushes here, you have a few options. Once more, if you're working with free brushes, you could pick in the airbrushing pack, so brushes that come with Procreate, the hard brush. And using the slider here on the side, you could lower the opacity of the hard brush, probably around 40–50%. That's going to depend on the effect that you want. But essentially what you want is you want to be able to create overlaps between strokes. Now these overlaps are one of the things that we're going to use to create a watercolor effect, so they're super, super important. That being said, if you do have my watercolor brushes, go ahead and select the Dark Edges watercolor, because this brush has a lot of effects, a lot of textures, and some color variation within the brush, which means you're going to save time further down the road. But again, if you have free brushes, that's totally fine as well. So we're going to start by just mapping out the shell. We're going to draw a bunch of different sections for the shells, and those sections are pretty much big rectangle with rounded edges. Now for that, I recommend starting with the smaller one around the sides and then moving up towards the top. Now the size of the brush is going to depend on the size of canvas that you're using, as well as which brush you're using. So just test out a few different brush sizes, and seriously, it doesn't need to be one specific size. That's totally okay. And then yeah, just go around and draw some small little shapes around the edges of the shell. So as you can see, if you're using the watercolor brushes, the different sections are going to be slightly different hues, so that it looks even more natural. If you're using the free brushes, you're not going to see that difference in color just yet, but I'm going to show you again tips on how to create it manually, so don't worry about it. And once you have the sections on the edge, all you have to do is go back and just add a few bigger ones that connect with the top of the shell. And finally, if you have any gaps along the top edge, just go back and fill those in with more shapes. Great, so next we're going to work on the turtle's body, and we're going to stick with the same brush, but we're going to use a few different colors. The first one we're going to use is some sort of a bluish green. It's pretty much in the middle in terms of brightness, a little bit more on the brighter side, but it's quite desaturated this time. It's almost a grayish green. And we're going to use this grayish green on the edge, the lower edge of the turtle. So we're going to start on the underside of the head, and then we're just going to bring that along on the neck. As you can see, it really does need to be super precise. And then we're going to bring it along the bottom part of the belly. And we're going to finish up with this bluish green, adding it on the bottom part of the different flippers. Awesome, so this is starting to look like a turtle, but a little bit of a boring turtle. So we're going to keep adding colors using the same brush. This time we're going to go with more of a green, so less of a bluish green. In the color palette, it's going to be this one right here. And again, the exact colors you're using here really don't matter, as long as you have something that is a little bit more blue for the bottom, and then something that is a bit more green or yellow for the midsection. That's totally okay. Now here, what we're going to do is we're just going to follow along the blue parts with this new color, leaving a little bit of white towards the top. Now on the belly, we're not going to leave any white, we're just going to connect the color with the shell. But on the flippers, we are going to leave a little bit of white towards the top to make it look like there's some light hitting the legs. And I know at this point it looks crazy because we have a bunch of overlaps. Don't worry, bear with me. We're going to blend everything in the next step, but before that we're going to add these spots on the flippers while we are working with this brush. And for those spots, it might be a good idea to create a new layer so that we can use blending modes and opacity to blend them with the other colors below them. So just create a new layer above your colors but still below your textures and rename it to spots. And we're going to go back to the brown that we used for the shell, which is this one right here. Now there's no right or wrong way to add the spots, but I do have a few tips for you. You're mostly going to find them on the flippers, and they're going to be bigger on the front side of the front flipper, and then they're going to get progressively smaller. But for the back flipper, it's the opposite. So they're going to be bigger towards the bottom part or back part of the back flipper, and then they're going to get progressively smaller. You might also get a few on the neck, but those would probably be pretty small, and you might get a few to frame the eye. Now here you can totally just copy what I have in my example or what I'm going to do in the video, but you could also go ahead and look at reference pictures for sea turtle and just go along with those spots. Now if you look at reference pictures, you're probably going to see that they have way more than what I'm personally going to draw. I think it's a good idea to draw fewer spots than a whole lot of spots, because then your illustration is just going to be a little bit too crowded. But I guess that's a personal preference. If you wanted to draw spots everywhere, that's totally okay, of course. And with that, it is time for the secret password. So if you've watched this far in the video, please go ahead and leave a comment with the word ocean. I know if you're new to the channel, it might be a little bit confusing as to what the secret password is. It's a game that we play here. In every single illustration video, I hide a secret password for you to find, and it does a few things. First thing is, it's just fun for me because you guys know me, you see my face in the intro, you hear my voice throughout the entire video, but I have no idea who you are. And whenever you leave a comment, no matter what the comment is, I get to sometimes see your face, sometimes see your name, and it's just great to see who's part of the creative community that we're building here on this channel. And the other reason I do the secret password is that it gives me a lot of insight into how to edit and pace my videos better, which helps me create better tutorials for you guys, and that's obviously super important. So if you watch this far, once more, just leave a comment with a word ocean, and then we're going to keep going. Great, so once you have all the spots, we're going to just lower the opacity of that layer so again they blend a little bit better with the color underneath, and then just playing with the slider until you find something you like. Now the exact number is totally up to you. I think I'm gonna go with, let's go with 65 for now, and that's something that you can obviously always adjust as you go. Now we're almost at the point of starting to blend everything, adding color variation and shadows, but before that we're going to add the eye and the nostrils, and we're going to do that on a new layer that we're going to rename to facial features. Now the facial features, we're going to use almost black, so in the color palette it's this one right here. And in terms of brushes, if you're using the free Procreate brushes, you could stick with the hard brush, but make sure that you lift the opacity back up to either 90 or 100%. We want to make sure that we have something really nice in black. But if you do have the watercolor brushes, at this stage, you could pick the thin, intense watercolor. Now pretty simple here, we're just going to fill in the eye. If you want, you could also add some nostrils, so just 2 tiny little lines. And just so the eye doesn't look like a hole, we're going to pick pure white and we're just going to add a bit of a highlight. Great, so at this stage we just need to make this look good because we have basic colors, but it looks totally crazy. So we're going to start by blending these different color sections that we have and try to give them a little bit more of a watercolor look. So for that, go ahead and select your colors layer. And if you're working with free brushes, you're going to use this tool right here, which is called the smudge tool. And you're going to set it to, in the airbrushing pack, the soft brush or the medium brush. Both could totally work. Again, it's a question of personal preference. If you do have the watercolor brushes though, you would set your paintbrush and then the smudge tool, really the paintbrush, to the water blender, so at the very bottom of the watercolor pack. And we're going to use these brushes to go over the different edges that we have and kind of blend them in. And we want to do that with randomness. So if you're working with the watercolor brushes, if you just go over your line, there's already a lot of randomness within the brush. So as you can see, the color kind of goes everywhere. Now, if you're working with the smudge tool, there isn't that randomness, it is much more smooth. So you're just going to need to take a little bit more time to go and do randomness yourself. Now this is way too much, my brush was too big, but you get the idea. So it's pretty simple here, it should just take a few seconds, but this is how we're going to start building our watercolor effect, so make sure you take the time to do it right. And at this stage, it's also a good idea to just lower the opacity of your clean sketch layer just to see a bit better what you're working with. You still want to see it a tiny little bit, but almost totally gone. So once everything is blended, you should get a better feel for what your turtle is going to look like, but it's still a little bit flat. So in the next step, I'm going to show you how to quickly add some shadows, but before that, I want to show you how to add color variation within the shell. Now there's a really cool tip that you've probably seen me use before if you watch any of my watercolor videos, which is with the color layer selected, we're going to use the selection tool. We're going to set it to freehand and we're going to select a part of the shell. Now here I'm going to add some highlights, so I'm going to select the top of the shell. Making sure that the color fill option is deactivated, we're going to select the feather option and we're going to feather our selection probably between 20 and 30%. Once more, it's going to depend on the size of your turtle and the size of your canvas. So the exact number is really up to you, but essentially feathering is creating some sort of a gradient with our selection. And then with that selection, if we go in the adjustment panel here at the top, selecting hue, saturation, and brightness, we're going to be able to change the color of that selection, which again is a gradient. So we're going to be able to quickly create a gradient within the shell. Now I said I wanted to add some highlights, so I'm just going to increase my brightness here, maybe increase my saturation, and maybe play with the hue a little bit to make it more yellow, like it's the sun or something. Once more, this is something you can totally experiment with. It doesn't have to be the same numbers as I have. But as you can see, it took a few seconds, but already the shell looks so much more fun. And this is a technique that you can use if you're working with the free brushes to add some color variation on the turtle in general. So you would just use your selection tool, but this time you would draw a random selection, feathering the random selection again between 20 and 30%. And with hue, saturation, and brightness, once more, you could just play with the hue a little bit to add some color variation everywhere. Now, if you're working with the watercolor brushes, you don't need to do that, but if you're working with the free brushes, you might want to do this step a few times, again, just to add some randomness within your piece and make it look more like real watercolor. We're going to keep the shading pretty simple in this video, so we're just going to create a new layer above the facial features, above the spots and above the colors, but still below the texture and effects. And we're going to rename this layer to Shadows. Now here you could go ahead and color pick the different colors that you have in your turtle, make them darker, and just paint over to create shadows. That could totally work, of course, but since we're working digitally, we have something called blending modes that we can use, similarly to what we did for the sketch. So we're going to set this shadow layer to the blending mode linear burn, and we're going to lower the opacity for now around 50%. So what that means is we can pick just one color and use that color for all the shadows, and it's going to adapt to the colors underneath and change so that it matches, for example, the brown, the blue, and so forth. Now, the color you use for your shadow is totally up to you. The only thing I would recommend is not going with anything neutral like a gray or a black, because then your shadows are going to look super muddy. I personally like to have shadows that have a bit of purple in them, so something kind of like this could work well. I'm actually going to add it in the color palette here, so when you download it, it's going to be right there under the black. But otherwise, you could experiment with different colors, of course. And with the same brush that we've been using, so either in the hair brushing panel, the hard brush, but this time going back with a lower opacity, around 40–50%, or in the watercolor brushes, the dark edges watercolor. We're going to paint just a few shadows to help differentiate the different body parts of the turtle, because right now it's kind of just all one big thing. So if we think about it a little bit, the turtle usually would be underwater, which means the light source, the sun, would be on top. But the sun would probably be reflecting on some sand that is under right here, which means the sand would bump back some light on the belly. So again, what that means is we're going to get a shadow under the shell, but not right down to the very edge of the belly. And if you want to intensify your shadow in some sections, you can just layer your strokes, and it's going to make it darker and darker every time you layer strokes. We're probably also going to get a shadow on the flippers that are furthest away from us. So this one right here, maybe a bit on the tail. This flipper right here. And we're probably going to get a shadow on this part of the neck right here. So kind of the middle bottom part of the neck. And if you want to be really extra, we can also add some shadows on the bottom part of each section of the shell. So just kind of outlining it really quickly like this, that can make a big difference too. And just like we did for the other colors, we're going to go back and blend these shadows. So either using the smudge tool if you're working with the free brushes, or if you're working with the watercolor brushes, setting your paintbrush to the water blender and just going over any edge that you want to blend in. Again, it's not something that needs to be precise in any way, but you can see it makes a big difference, and it takes like 2 seconds. We're also going to add some highlights on the shell to really make it pop. So go ahead and select the color layer, and we're just going to erase a few lines. So you can pick the eraser, and no matter which brushes you're using, we're all going to set this eraser to, in the airbrushing pack, the soft brush. And we're going to lower the opacity probably around, I don't know, 50–60%. And then you're just going to erase some random scribbles, focusing them on the top part of the shell. And the very last thing we're going to do is just add a few details to help delimitate, for example, the top of the head or any other area that is not super sharp. But before that, if you do have the watercolor brushes and want to add some splatters, it's a very simple step. You would just go ahead and create a new layer below the effects but above everything else, so above the shadows. Rename this layer to Splatters. And set the blending mode to linear burn so that they blend well with the other colors. For now, you can leave the opacity at 100%, but you could always lower it later if you want. And you can use any color you want for your splatter, any color that is in your turtle, that is. I'm personally going to use the kind of grayish, yellowish green that we have. And we're just going to pick the splatter brush that comes with the watercolor brushes. Now, if you're working with free brushes, there isn't that much of a great alternative. If you go in the spray paint pack, there is a splatter brush here, but as you can see, it's not the best. So unfortunately, it's not ideal. You could also use the G-Clay brush, but it's super dense. So they're just not the best, sadly. But it's definitely not an essential step, so you could just skip ahead. But otherwise, if you do have the watercolor brushes, just using the splatter brush, you can quickly add a few splatters to really bring your piece together and make it just look a little bit more finished. So now that we have our turtle, the last little thing we might want to do is just refine some details like the mouth and the top of the head. Because right now we do have the clean sketch, but if we hide it, the turtle kind of gets lost in the paper. So for now, we're going to keep the clean sketch activated, but we're going to create a new layer, once more below the textures and effects and below the splatters, but above everything else. And we're going to rename this layer to Details. Here, once more, you can pick any color that you use in your turtle. I think the grayish yellow green works really well. And we're going to go back to the brush we used for the sketch. So if you're working with free Procreate brushes, you're going to pick in the sketching pack the HB pencil. Otherwise, with the watercolor pack, you would pick the coloring pencil. And you're just going to brush over any line that you want to really see well on the final result, or that would be missing when you are going to delete the sketch. So in my case, I'm just going to have a nice tiny line here at the top of the head. Nothing super crazy. We might want to use it on the mouth as well, just to define it a little bit better. Maybe here to help with the flippers. Maybe around the tail. But otherwise, that's pretty much it. And you can double check to make sure you're done. You can just hide your clean sketch and see how everything looks. I think I'm happy with this, but otherwise, you can just go back and add a few more clean lines. And you could also, if you want, play with different blending modes for this detail layer. I like to use linear burn for this layer as well. And if you use linear burn, you're going to see you might want to lower the opacity a little bit. But I feel like it just helps with the watercolor effect using a blending mode like this. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn how to paint more watercolor pieces in Procreate, I highly recommend you check out this playlist because I have a bunch more videos for you. But before you leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos. Then click on the link right here and I'll meet you there.